My neighbor was acting strange, so I followed him and found this. My neighbor, Mr. Delaney, has always been a little peculiar. He keeps to himself, doesn't talk much, and has this old, creaky house that looks like it's straight out of a horror movie. Most of us in the neighborhood figured he was just a harmless eccentric, but recently his behavior got weirder. He started sneaking out late at night, always carrying this old, worn-out duffel bag. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. So, one night, curiosity got the best of me, and I decided to follow him. What I found still gives me chills. It all started a few weeks ago. I noticed Mr. Delaney was leaving his house at odd hours, usually after midnight. At first I thought maybe he was just an insomniac taking a walk to clear his head. But then I saw the duffel bag. Every time he left, he was carrying the same faded black bag, slung over his shoulder like it held something important. He'd glance around nervously before stepping out, like he was making sure no one was watching. It was unsettling. The guy was in his late 60s, retired, and didn't seem like the type to be involved in anything shady. But the way he moved, always looking over his shoulder, made my imagination run wild. One night, I casually mentioned it to my best friend, Sarah. "You're overthinking it," she said, laughing. "Maybe he's just going to some late-night chess club or something." "Carrying a duffel bag? Every single time?" I shot back. "There's something weird about it, Sarah." "Then why don't you follow him and find out?" she said, half joking. But the idea stuck in my head. That's how, a few nights later, I found myself peering out my living room window, waiting for Mr. Delaney to make his move. When he finally stepped out, glancing around like usual, I grabbed my jacket and decided to see where he was going. I waited until Mr. Delaney was a good distance down the street before stepping outside. My heart was pounding. I mean, I'd never done anything like this before. What if he caught me? What would I even say? "Oh, hey, Mr. Delaney, just out for a midnight stroll too?" Yeah, right. He was moving quickly, almost like he was on a mission. The duffel bag swung at his side as he walked down the quiet, dimly lit street. I stayed about half a block behind, sticking to the shadows and trying not to make any noise. Every now and then, he'd stop and glance around, and I'd duck behind a parked car or a tree, praying he wouldn't spot me. At one point, he turned down an alley I didn't even know existed. It was narrow and lined with overgrown bushes and leaning fences. My stomach churned. This was starting to feel less like casual curiosity, and more like I was about to stumble into something I wasn't supposed to see. I debated turning back, but then I thought about all the weirdness I'd noticed over the past few weeks. If I didn't find out what he was up to now, it would drive me crazy. So I took a deep breath and followed him into the alley. The alley was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that makes your skin crawl. The faint glow of a distant streetlight barely illuminated the narrow path, casting long, jagged shadows across the ground. I could hear Mr. Delaney's footsteps echoing softly ahead of me, but I couldn't see him anymore. I crept along, careful not to make a sound, and finally caught sight of him again. He had stopped near the end of the alley, standing by what looked like an old, rusty gate. He glanced around nervously, his usual routine, but this time he seemed extra jittery, like he knew someone was watching. My heart pounded as I pressed myself against the side of a building, trying to stay hidden. Then, I saw him do something that made my breath catch. He pulled out a key from his pocket and unlocked the gate, slipping through it quickly. I waited a few moments before creeping closer. The gate led to an overgrown backyard behind an abandoned-looking building. The whole scene felt like something out of a movie, the kind where the curious protagonist makes one wrong move and ends up regretting everything. I peeked through the gate just in time to see Mr. Delaney disappear into the building through a side door. He hadn't turned on any lights, and the place looked like it hadn't been touched in years. The duffel bag was still slung over his shoulder, its contents a mystery. At this point, my curiosity was outweighing my fear. I had to know what he was doing. Taking one last deep breath, I slipped through the gate and followed him inside. The door creaked slightly as I pushed it open, and I froze, holding my breath. The air inside was damp and smelled faintly of mildew, like the place hadn't been aired out in years. Dim moonlight streamed through the broken windows, casting strange shapes on the walls. I couldn't hear Mr. Delaney's footsteps anymore, but I could see faint scuff marks on the dusty floor leading deeper into the building. I followed the trail cautiously, my pulse racing with every step. The hallway was narrow and lined with doors, most of which were ajar, revealing empty rooms filled with cobwebs and debris. The whole place had an unsettling vibe, like it was holding on to secrets it didn't want to share. Then I heard it, a soft, muffled sound coming from somewhere up ahead. It was rhythmic, almost like humming. I couldn't tell if it was Mr. Delaney or something else, but it sent chills down my spine. I crept closer, peeking around a corner, and finally saw him. He was in a small room at the end of the hall, illuminated by the faint glow of a flashlight he'd set on the ground. He had the duffel bag open and was pulling something out of it, several small, neatly wrapped packages. He handled them carefully, almost reverently, and placed them on a rickety table in the center of the room. I squinted, trying to make out what the packages were, but I couldn't get a clear view. I leaned forward slightly, and that's when my foot hit a loose piece of wood. The loud crack echoed down the hallway like a gunshot. Mr. Delaney froze. My heart stopped as Mr. Delaney's head snapped toward the hallway. For a moment, I thought he might not have seen me, but then his flashlight beam swept across the corridor and landed directly on me. There was no hiding now. "Who's there?" he demanded, his voice sharp and steady, not at all like the jittery man I'd been watching these past few weeks. I hesitated, every instinct screaming at me to run, but my feet stayed planted. It's me, from next door," I stammered, stepping into the light. I saw you leave, and I just wanted to make sure everything was okay." It was a terrible excuse, and I knew it. Mr. Delaney didn't look convinced either. He narrowed his eyes at me, the flashlight casting deep shadows on his face. "You've been following me?" he asked, his tone more disappointed than angry. Look, I didn't mean to intrude," I said quickly, raising my hands. "It's just, you've been acting strange lately, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong." His expression softened slightly, and he sighed, lowering the flashlight. "You shouldn't be here," he said, shaking his head. "This isn't your business." I glanced past him at the table, where the small, wrapped packages were neatly lined up. "What's in the bag, Mr. Delaney?" I asked, my voice steadier now. "Are you in some kind of trouble?" He hesitated, his eyes darting between me and the packages. For a moment, I thought he wasn't going to answer. But then, with a resigned sigh, he stepped aside and motioned toward the table. "You might as well see for yourself." I stepped into the room, my nerves on edge as I approached the table. The packages were smaller than I'd realized, wrapped neatly in brown paper and tied with thin string. They looked harmless enough, but the way Mr. Delaney had been sneaking around with them made me uneasy. I glanced at him. "Can I asked, gesturing to the nearest package. He nodded, looking oddly defeated. "Go ahead." I reached out, carefully untying the string and peeling back the paper. Inside was a stack of faded photographs, black and white, some of them frayed at the edges. They were old family pictures, smiling faces at picnics, children playing in a yard, a young couple on their wedding day. I blinked in confusion. "These are just photos?" "Not just photos," Mr. Delaney said, his voice low. "These are memories, my family's memories, the only ones I have left." I looked up at him, completely caught off guard. "What do you mean?" He sat down heavily on a creaky chair, running a hand through his graying hair. "After my wife passed and my kids moved away, I couldn't bear to let these go. I started storing them here, in this old place, to keep them safe. But lately, I've been sorting through them, trying to figure out what to do with everything. That's why I've been coming here." I stared at the photos, my heart sinking as the weight of his words hit me. The secret he'd been hiding wasn't sinister or dangerous. It was heartbreakingly human. This abandoned building was his sanctuary, a place where he could process his grief and hold on to the memories of the people he loved. "I didn't mean to scare anyone," he continued, his voice tinged with sadness. "It's just hard to do this at home. Too many reminders, too many ghosts." I felt a pang of guilt for assuming the worst about him. "I had no idea," I said softly, putting the photos back into their wrapping. Honestly, I thought something bad was going on." He let out a dry chuckle. "I guess I can't blame you. Sneaking around at night with a duffel bag probably doesn't look great." I managed a small smile. "Yeah, it kind of sets off alarm bells." For the next hour, Mr. Delaney told me about his family, their laughter, their love, and the tragedy that left him feeling like a stranger in his own life. His wife had passed unexpectedly years ago, and his children had grown up and moved far away, busy with families of their own. The photos were all he had left to remind him of the life they'd built together. As Mr. Delaney spoke, I realized how lonely he must have been. All this time, I'd been watching him through the lens of suspicion, never stopping to think about what might be driving his behavior. He wasn't some mysterious figure hiding secrets. He was a man trying to hold on to the pieces of his life that mattered most. "Why do you keep them here, though?" I asked, gesturing to the packages. "Wouldn't it be easier to have them at home?" He shook his head. "It hurts too much to see them every day. Here, it feels safe, like I can take my time deciding what to do with them." I thought for a moment, then said, "What if you didn't have to do it alone?" He raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "I mean, maybe we could figure it out together," I offered. "I could help you organize the photos, maybe even digitize them so they're easier to keep. That way, they won't feel so overwhelming." For a moment, he just stared at me, as if he couldn't quite believe what I was saying. Then his expression softened, and he nodded. That might actually be nice. Over the next few weeks, we started working on the project together. I brought over a scanner and some storage boxes, and we spent hours sorting through the photos, laughing at the stories he shared about each one. It wasn't just about preserving the memories. It was about reconnecting him to the life he thought he'd lost. As the weeks went by, my perspective on Mr. Delaney completely changed. What started as curiosity, and maybe a little paranoia, turned into something unexpectedly meaningful. Each photo we sorted came with a story, and through those stories, I got to see a side of him I never would have guessed existed. There was the picture of his wife on their wedding day, radiant and laughing, as if the whole world was theirs. "She could light up a room," he said softly, holding the photo like it was a fragile treasure. Then there were the snapshots of his kids growing up. Birthday parties, school plays, family vacations. Each image was a thread in the tapestry of his life, and together, we were piecing it back together. One day, as we were finishing up another batch of photos, Mr. Delaney turned to me and said, "I didn't realize how much I needed this. I thought I'd lost everything, but now it feels like I'm getting some of it back." His words hit me harder than I expected. I'd started this whole thing out of curiosity, but now I realized it had become something much bigger. Helping him reconnect with his past was helping me see the value of small, everyday moments, the kind you don't appreciate until they're gone. When we finished digitizing all the photos, Mr. Delaney seemed lighter, like a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. He decided to keep the originals in a neatly organized album at home, no longer afraid of the memories they carried. "Do you think your kids would like to see these?" I asked one day. He hesitated, then nodded. "I think it's time. I've been so distant from them since their mom passed. Maybe sharing these memories will help us reconnect." It was the start of something new for Mr. Delaney. Over the next few months, he reached out to his kids, sending them some of the digitized photos and even inviting them to visit. To his surprise and relief, they were eager to reconnect. By the time they visited, it felt like the family bonds were beginning to heal. For me, this experience changed how I see the world. It reminded me that everyone has a story, even the people we think we know, but never truly see. Mr. Delaney wasn't just a quirky neighbor with strange habits. He was someone carrying the weight of his past, doing his best to move forward. This journey taught me that sometimes curiosity can lead to unexpected connections and meaningful experiences. Have you ever discovered something surprising about someone you thought you knew? Share your story in the comments. I'd love to hear it. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join me for more tales of everyday life that remind us of the beauty in human connection. Thanks for watching.